Hi everybody, welcome to Matthew's Movie Mentions for weeks 49 and 50, movies up to the 17th of December. Sorry for the delay on this one, I had to miss a week. My usual extra busy run up to Christmas hit pretty much as scheduled, but also included 2 work trips that were planned incredibly late. So I've got 2 weeks in one here, so we've got a lot to get through. This week I'm going to be discussing The Parallax View, Tango and Cash, Bandits, The Fountain, Rise of the Guardians, Best in Show, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Queen of Cutway, Girl Rising, Mowgli Legend of the Jungle, Christmas Eve, Let the Right One In, Intolerable Cruelty, The Assignment, Josie and the Pussycats, There Will Be Blood, Working Girl, Holiday Inn, Stronger, Milk, Selfless, Chariots of Fire, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Girls Against Boys, Cloud Atlas, and Say Anything. So there is a lot to get through. Let's get on with it. The Parallax View. A friend had recommended this to me on a few occasions, so I decided to take the plunge for it. It's a really interesting paranoid thriller, but it felt like it was lacking a second character, a partner, colleague, another person that the main character could interact with and sort of just keep us up to date on what's happening and what they're thinking. There was a lot that we had to read on screen, particularly about recognizing people and what they're doing, and I missed a couple of people that I didn't recognize that they were the significant person we should be focusing on, so I ended up a bit lost for 20 minutes in the middle or so. Tango and Cash certainly was a buddy comedy. The two leads are interesting and incredibly tropey characters, but we had a lot of setup on everything, and then it was just, and they're going to hate each other because they're such different people, rather than coming up with a reason for them to hate each other. Bandits, as ever, hooray for Cate Blanchett. She absolutely rescues this film. Is it me, or are there a lot of Hollywood films, particularly over the last probably 20 or 30 years, that are all about, hey, polyamory, that's viable and a good option? The Fountain was visually astounding, and it's a really good idea, but I felt the execution fell down somewhat because there wasn't a really strong thread between the different stories that we saw, other than the same characters and actors, to really see why we were getting all these different stories. Rise of the Guardians is an example for why celebrity voice actors are not always the best, and the story in this could have been interesting, but it's not as good as Nightmare Before Christmas, or The Santa Claus, or a number of other similar things. Best in Show was incredibly disappointing, I rarely laughed, and there were a lot of very obvious jokes that were just cruel. The Nightmare Before Christmas, our Christmas 2018 episode of Pop Culture Deprived is going to cover this one. It is a very, very good film. The songs don't stand out except for one or two highlights, and I think the story is stretched a bit too thin for me for it to be a classic. The Queen of Cutway is a superb film. There are terrific performances, some really good tension throughout, and it felt like an incredibly realistic take on poverty in developing nations. It was heartbreaking and heartwarming. It seemed to be fairly hidden on Netflix, so I'm pleased I found it, but you might have to look for this one. Girl Rising sounded really interesting, with actors narrating stories about young women around the world. It was done very well, but it felt like a series of infomercials for the charity rather than something you would sit and learn from, which perhaps that's what it was. Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, I think would have been great had they released it before the live-action Jungle Book, but they were beaten to the punch. They have made some changes in this that both make sense and make it a little bit more interesting at times, but it lacks the sort of grandiose adventure side of Disney's version. Christmas Eve, Patrick Stewart in a Christmas film, it's always good, but it was a bit of an odd one. The overall idea, lots of people trapped in elevators around New York and their stories and things they learned, it is quite an interesting one, but there were just perhaps one or two too many stories, so they never quite got into any one as well as they could have done. And there's a point where there is a skeezy guy who is taking photos of a woman who's shrieking no at him and hiding behind her coat, which is a huge problem, so this film could do with some changes. Let the Right One In had been hyped up to a great degree. I think it lived up to it, but I did have very high expectations. It didn't exceed those expectations. And in the end, I do have probably more questions than answers. And I'm not entirely sure what the story was meant to have been or what we're supposed to take away from it. It really is just a snapshot. Intolerable Cruelty. I love that the Coen brothers try all different genres. Their rom-com. It's a good film. It's a laudable effort, but the film makes a few choices to try to be different from a normal romantic comedy, which I think actually hurt it, rather than working with the genre conventions to end up as like this is what it's looked like when it's done really well by great filmmakers. The Assignment, which is also called Tomboy. Oh, where to start? It's not offensive, which there are people out there who thought this was going to be a very offensive film. It does some interesting things. It goes to quite a lot of lengths to show that Michelle Rodriguez is playing an actual man, because we get to see that she's an actual man very clearly on screen, rather than it being a woman pretending to be a man. The story has such potential to do things about what it's like being a woman in the world and the differences between the genders and how they're treated. And particularly because you have Sigourney Weaver as this doctor who has clearly succeeded in a male-dominated profession, but has had to do it by dressing like a man, acting like a man, and all of this, and it takes none of those options. It is largely a very obvious action film. Josie and the Pussycats, I never watched back in the day when it came out, despite being into this sort of scene and metal and rock and some of the stuff shown here. I was always worried. It felt like a bit like a cash grab from a studio or a corporation who were trying to make money from my community, and I think it was. There Will Be Blood. I think I enjoyed it. It's interesting how this film was styled very much like a horror film. It's kind of a horror is released from the ground in the case of the oil, and it makes this guy greedy and become the monster himself. Ultimately, it's a bit too dark. I think it could have been stronger had it not quite gone as dark as it did. Working Girl is a fun film. It's got some very memorable characters. I feel like Sigourney Weaver's character is made too much of a villain, and I'd have appreciated a bit more that Melanie Griffith's character did learn from her, but then did some of those things in a kinder and more honest style. Holiday Inn, the channel that broadcast it over here, cut the problematic scene. Ultimately, it's a slightly odd romance musical. It seems to think that the only days that exist are those around US holidays. There's a couple of good songs, a couple of good dances. I had no idea who I was supposed to be rooting for in this film, or what was going to happen to them, so yeah, it didn't hold the interest like certainly sort of more modern versions of this. Stronger, it is not often that a film makes me cry, but Stronger definitely managed it. The juxtaposition of the pain and difficulty against the effort from some of the characters was done incredibly well, and the two leads in this, Jake Gyllenhaal and Tatiana Maslany, were sensational. I think The Big Sick did some of the relationship elements better, and the feeling of debt to someone who is sick or disabled in this case better, but I am very pleased that I finally got to see this film. Milk, I think at the end you get to see the real life versions of the characters, and it did show how much work and effort the actors were putting in to portray them. It was done very well. It is a very good story that does resonate now quite well, to a good degree. Selfless, a weird film. If they'd done anything, absolutely anything in the beginning moments of this film to show Ben Kingsley having some tics or habits or personality quirks that they then carried through so we'd see them in Ryan Reynolds, it would have felt like, okay, there's some continuity of who this person is, but there's none of that. So once Ryan Reynolds turns up, it just feels like Ryan Reynolds. Chariots of Fire was a different film to the one I expected to get. I thought it was going to be much more about running and training, but I got less of that and much more about the religious situation of the characters that I didn't realise was part of it at all. It's an interesting enough film, but I don't think it's aged hugely well. I think it doesn't speak to some of the sort of modern nationalism, tribalism and bigotry that we see that like perhaps it could do and other films I've watched this year have. Such as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Almost everything in this film, if not everything, was done superbly. The performances from everyone were impeccable. The story presenting every version of every argument was something you do not often see, or at least done as well as it's done here. And in the end, the real-world situation of the actors, it really helped it resonate in its finale even more. Girls Against Boys is a bizarre horror film. It tries to be a lot more than I think it actually is. The best description I can give is that it's Thelma and Louise meets Fight Club, but that doesn't fully cover it. It was interesting, but I don't think it does anything more than we've seen in other films, probably done better. Cloud Atlas is similar to other films I've seen this year, like The Fountain. There are different stories in this film, but they don't quite hang together well enough to feel like it's worth having them all there. And I think the way the book is structured is so important to the way the stories have revelations that because they're presented in a slightly different way, a slightly different order here, it's robbed some of that power. And Say Anything is yet another film where the protagonist is not really the central character of this story. There's an iconic scene in this that comes and goes with barely a comment, and ultimately doesn't do much for the story itself. So my recommendations this week, Queen of Cutway, terrific movie. It has great performances. It's got that brutal view of poverty, but that's countered by characters who are positive and yeah, they're heroic. Some great characters that really believe in what they're doing. And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? I recorded it without expecting to love it as much as I did. The real-world relationship of Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy impacts the finale of this film in a way that makes it better. And I think it is as strong now as it was when it was released, and especially when you have films like Get Out that build on some of this premise to then become their own film and their own story in their own right. So I would suggest seeking both those out and checking them out. So we are just off doing 365 new films this year, so I should be hitting it in the next week. So Merry Christmas to everyone, Happy Holidays. I will record at least one week to cover everything up to Christmas, if not actually recording both for the end of the year at the same time. So I will see you all next week.